Little background on kind of our history. I think I met you at King's Court, was an old venue. It was an old high school that was long since abandoned, and I think originally turned into a bar. But then at some point, and you'll have more specifics on this. At some point, it was kind of the basement or the gymnasium was rented out as a venue for all ages punk rock, metal, rock and roll shows. Um,
Well, I think I think there was a bar because as you know, it was an abandoned school. I think it was Floyd School, and I don't know at what point it stopped being a school. I think the building dated from around maybe 1900, 1910 or thereabouts. So you would come in on I think the 22nd Street entrance. It was 22nd and Court, right?
yeah.
So you'd come in and there would be immediately to your right there would be a bar, which I think was some sort of like whether it was a public bar or like a VFW type private club. I don't really know.
Yeah, the VFW is still there today, across the way from it.
Okay, that might have been it then, because then you would go downstairs, and I think it would have been in the gymnasium, would be Kings Court proper, which I think and I don't really know who owned the building or who rented it out, but I think they did shows intermittently there from I want to say about the mid '80s, long before my time, until I think if I remember right, it closed in the summer of 1993,
Mm.
and
Not,
I'm not sure. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
not that it's important. Was there a Holly Barron or something to that effect? The name escapes me. Guy that ran the place or owned it, possibly.
I think that might have been the guy who owned the building, because as far as I know, it's basically run by Rob Trinan,
Yeah,
and he took care of renting it from him and all the maintenance issues, booking, what have you.
yeah. So I guess without getting into too many of the specifics on people, and I really kind of wanted to talk about what it was, and it was why it was unique. You basically got an abandoned school that ends up being a music venue, and a lot of the sub pop bands and other notable bands of the early '90s and mid '90s came through there, and you didn't see this in other cities, and a lot of them would refer to Kings Court as their favorite. What do you attribute that to?
I don't know. 'Cause, I mean, I was at this point, I just sort of wandered in at one point as a spectator. I think the first time I went there would have been in October of '87, if I remember correctly. And, I was just one of the kids on the floor like any other. Obviously, growing up in Morningside, nowhere near there. I'd never seen anything quite like that myself. As far as the bands went, I don't really know where else they were playing in terms of when they went across the country. I know there was the lift ticket down here, which was roughly contemporaneous, which would have been I think around what is now the waiting room in downtown Benson. I know that I think a lot of them would come and play there. I know the Cog Factory hadn't happened yet in Omaha. That came a little bit later on. But yeah, I think it was. I don't know whether I assume these bands were probably just playing in bars, so I assume they didn't have a lot of experience doing all ages shows, unless it was specifically something that they did, like a Fugazi type thing, where they insisted on doing that sort of thing. And who else was doing that in the '80s and '90s? I
Yeah.
don't know if anybody was.
And just to establish, I guess I didn't give any background. We are both from Sioux City, Iowa, which is a corner of northwest Iowa, where Nebraska, South Dakota, and Iowa all kind of converge. And what was it, roughly 80,000 people?
Yeah, still is,
Kind
as
of
it has been, I think, since about World War II.
Yeah, I mean, and traditionally kind of an industrial packing house, agricultural town. So not a lot of, I guess, excitement on a lot of fronts. I mean, that goes maybe toward my theory on why it was such a successful venue is you've got not a lot going on for the younger crowd, and this was an all ages venue. But there has to be a number of pieces that go together for something to succeed like this, it seems like. I mean, I'm sure you had it happening in other cities and towns, and not to the degree of success that it had. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think it's not a bad point, because I think, and I don't know a lot of the pieces of the puzzle myself, but it's something I like to compare it to is, I mentioned the Cog Factory in I guess what would have been just west and north of downtown Omaha, which started out, I think, roughly in the, because I don't know what else they had. They had the car factory and the ranch bowl, and to some extent that scene never really went away, and it sort of evolved into the slow down waiting room type grown up scene that it is today. And I think maybe also given your theory, something I might add on to that is, not only was there not a lot of alternatives as far as what was going on, but it was probably a better alternative than other options that might have been available.
Yeah, and it almost is analogous to me to, when you've read in the past that during certain periods of oppression, it's the healthiest time for music or art or literature. And then that's kind of what I was thinking. Is it you didn't have a lot going on? You had a number of teens and young adults that really didn't have a lot of alternatives, unless you wanted to go to the bar, or as a teenager, what else did you do? Go drink coffee at Horizon restaurant till 3
Right, because there was nowhere else for you to go.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it was an interesting time, and that happened to be the place where I met you. I remember thinking you were from New York City because you had spent some time out east, and you came back with this accent. So I'm like, who's the guy from New York? You're like, no, I'm actually from here.
Yeah. Well, when was the first time y'all played down there? Was it was 91?
I think it would have been 92. We were. At least that's what the little date stamp on the camcorder tape says.
Okay.
I think we played. We might have opened for Milk or Dumpster Juice. Kind of rings a bell. I can't remember. It's all groggy, but.
Yeah. Was that before the Kid Death Show then?
Yeah, that was before the Kid Death Show. The Kid Death Show I think it was a Halloween gig that came later.
Okay. Yeah, I think Dumpster Juice was. Either an AMREP band or an AMREP wannabe, because you had a lot of I think bands coming down from the Twin Cities at that point. You had the occasional, and there was still sort of a mix of like punk rock bands and metal bands. You had a little bit of both.
Yeah,
you had a lot of AMREP or proto AMREP type bands, and then like you said, you had a lot of national acts that either had like a cult following, or that that a lot of people here didn't really know about, because obviously we're going to see this sort of thing on MTV. You had your Bikini Kill, your Nation Ulysses, your Sub Pop bands. I think Nirvana was supposed to play King's Court at one point, but Trina wouldn't take them because it was a weeknight.
Really? I had never heard that. I did think. I think I remember hearing that King's Court was Helmet's favorite venue to play. Was that Maximum Rock and Roll or one of those publications?
Oh, probably. Because I think the first time they played, it would have been right after FBLA come out, which I think would have been 89 or 90, because they hadn't gone on MTV and gotten semi-huge yet. And they'd played down here, and I think I was at the show, but I don't remember it very well, but apparently it was just sort of epic. And it was the sort of thing that they remembered long afterwards, and they came back several times, even when they were starting to break somewhat big on MTV as well.
Yeah. So I was pretty wet behind the ears when I first started going there. I think I was a sophomore, and you were probably out of school maybe a couple years.
Well, actually, first time I went to King's Court, I was like 14 myself, so there you go.
Okay, yeah, I showed up later in the picture, I guess. But yeah, it was a unique place, and I guess we touched on that. Moving on a little bit, a few years down the road, you actually had more of a hand in this one. This was called the Cattle Club. Would have been Cattle Club Collective, I guess, was the formal title, right?
Well, Collective came later. That was like the fifth or sixth iteration of the Cattle Club. I think there were maybe, over the course of like 12 years or so, there were maybe 3 or 4 different Cattle Clubs in different locations, because I think King's Court was shut down in the summer of '93. And then for a month or so in November of '93, you had, and I'm still not exactly sure what this guy's whole story was, but you had a guy who had rented a place on 4th Street above what is probably now Luciano's or one of those high-end places. and he basically just opened it up as like a coffee shop slash hangout joint slash club. And they did shows there for about a month or so, and they ran off at some point, I guess.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that was, I think that was maybe kind of the inspiration behind the original Cattle Club. It was called The Way Out,
Right.
and it was, like you said, it was upstairs of where Luciano's Italian restaurant is now, which was, I think it was formerly maybe the Scandia or one of those bars.
It sounds right. I don't remember my Lower 4th Street bars all that well.
But the idea behind it was kind of a free exchange of artists and poetry and musicians all converging in one place. And it was a neat idea. It almost felt like a commune in some ways. I think that's probably because of the guy.
Essentially, it was. I mean, there's a couple of hippies just passing through town that rented out the place, and I assume it was their idea.
Yeah, and I think our band actually played on the bill as a benefit for them to keep the place open, and then they ended up taking the benefit money and skipping town.
Yeah, it was a terrifying show. You could feel the floor bowing up and down the whole time. I thought we were going to fall through the damn floor.
I remember that. I was a little nervous.
But yeah, I think they ran off like within a couple days of that show happening, and nobody knew where they were. Or they were just gone.
Yeah, but back to the point, I think maybe that was a little bit of a catalyst for forming the Cattle Club. I know. I don't know. Was it a joint endeavor when you got involved with the Cattle Club, or had Pete kind of had the idea to start it and brought in some people to assist with it?
I assume it was more Pete's doing than anybody else. I only got involved later on. A bunch of us, I suppose were recruited to sort of help out. We, became the core group, as it were. And that would have been, I think that opened up for the first time in February of '94, like a couple months after The Way Out closed down. And the place was an absolute disaster. So they shut that down within about a month. Because I think it's some sort of a grand opening show with Trenchmouth and I think somebody else came and played, and then they shut it down for a month, and they had to remodel the place.
It was formerly, didn't it have bullet holes in it? Wasn't it formerly like a thug club?
Probably.
Yeah, or 7-Eleven club or something to that effect. Maybe that wasn't the same building. I can't remember now.
It might have been, actually, because it was right down the street from the Red Room.
Yeah. So I mean, I remember you kind of. At least maybe not at the beginning, but more toward the middle and end, it seemed like you had a pretty big hand in organizing a lot of the shows, marketing them. You did a lot of flyers. You had some creative themes on your flyers. So you definitely had somewhat of a leadership role in making things happen there. What kind of struggles are associated with running an all-ages music venue like that?
Well, I mean, Peter booked all the bands. I just tried to hold all the rest of the shit together. And, I think I'm sort of amazed in retrospect that it lasted as long as it did, because there was never enough money, because you were trying to get by on whatever everybody was generous enough to throw in the can, and most of the people who came by, they didn't have any money to spare. So you would try and do the occasional show, but which you couldn't do too often. Because number one, your patrons could only afford so much, and number two, they'd probably get bored too. So then I think you had, and I didn't have a lot of dealings up front with the police myself, because I'm at various times I heard that they were either keeping a close eye on the place, or else just sort of resigning themselves to the fact that as long as everybody's there and we know they're there, there are worse places they could be. Maybe a little of both.
Yeah.
As I know, we were in regular contact with a fellow from Iowa Missing and Exploited Children, who would, basically had like a half a dozen kids or so he was trying to keep track of. And when one of them went missing, he would get a hold of me, and more often than not, they'd have showed up recently.
That's a good segue to what I was going to mention is, I mean, there were a lot of latchkey younger people that would come to the Cattle Club, and it wasn't a bar, so it was more of an all-ages thing. You could come drink coffee and basically loiter for 3 or 4 hours or more after school, and get away from whatever home you had or family issues. I'm sure there were some people that had a lot of family strife maybe going on. So in some senses, you may have been a bit of a babysitter. Would that be accurate?
Probably. 'Cause I didn't know many of these kids at all because, like I said, I was from Morningside. And I think I think a lot of the original Kings Court crowd were Northside kids for the most part. Um, and then, so we set up over on West 7th, and all of a sudden there was a bunch of West Side kids. And some of the Northside kids and some newer Northside kids, and then the Morningside kids came in. And none of these larger groups really knew each other all that well. Sometimes they got along, sometimes they didn't. But yeah, it was a little bit like that at times.
And I mean, you had the unfortunate experience, and nobody wants to ever have to encounter this in their life. But there was somebody, a regular member that would hang out there, that ended up passing away there, and you had the unfortunate experience of discovering them, which I'm sure left a indelible scar. Was that kind of the beginning of the end for that iteration of the Cattle Club?
Surprisingly, not really. I mean, it shut us down for a while, and I think it, a lot of us just sort of like maybe ceased functioning for a while. And I thought that was the end right there. But, Pete being Pete, he didn't really give up. And I want to say, was it about 6 weeks later or so? I think that might have been when Trenchmouth showed up. Yeah, because this would have been in June. This would have been in June of '94, and I think it was either the night of or right after the white Bronco chase. Seriously, I should, because nobody had, there was no Twitter, there was no internet. We only heard about this, via cable, but we knew what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was supposed to be a show happening at some point, which it was really one of those bands that didn't show up. So, it shut us down for a while, and I think Pete got a hold of Trenchmouth, and they did sort of like a grand reopening. And I want to say that was sometime like in late July or maybe August, before the end of the summer, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And we pretty much went, chugging along from there, and believe it or not, it worked. We ended up having this hilarious interview with the Journal, where there's this, photo of us on the front page of the Journal, just sort of looking like, surrounded by all these old flyers, looking like a couple of pimps or something. I don't know. But I mean, it was good. It was good PR, though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was a Weekender or any kind of publication back in those days for current events or current entertainment events. It was just the Journal back then, as far as I know.
Hey, I don't think they had a Weekender yet. They had just like the Friday entertainment section, and that was it. But this, this was like the Journal front page of the Journal. This was actual news.
Yeah, I think I remember that. That was where you made reference to the 258 Rift number, didn't you?
Oh yeah. Well, you got a phone, and if you're going to get a phone, and presaging the future we live in now, where nobody remembers their phone number because we have our phones to do that for us, it only made sense if you were going to have a phone number that you would want to make something memorable.
Yeah, that was a great mnemonic.
So yeah, never get a phone number you can't make a word out of. To this day, I can still remember my landline was Altoid 1.
Really?
Yeah. Couldn't tell you what the number was, but I remember that it was Altoid 1. That was I think the last landline I had before I got rid of it when I was living up at Grandview.
Yeah, I think I had a song about my 11th grade locker combination, and for some reason I've forgotten many other combinations since then, but I still remember that one because of the song. So,
of course, now my cell phone number has 0, so I can't do that.
Yeah, there's no letter you can associate there.
No.
You and I we did a brief stint in a band, which was it was fun for me because we had no idea what it was going to sound like. We got a few guys together, myself, Wayne, and Jeff, and I think later Scott Farmer, and we just played songs, and we let you basically have free reign as far as lyrics and vocals go.
Yeah, that's basically the reason I don't drink Jägermeister anymore.
But I mean, that was your first experience. As far as performance goes, I mean, you'd done other things maybe, but not in a musical capacity. Is that fair?
Not really, no. I mean, I was a Suzuki kid when I was 5 years old. But that would be the only analog, I suppose.
Huh. Well, it was an interesting time for me because I had no preset expectations on what was going to come out. So I would just come up with a riff, start playing it, show it to Wayne on bass, and and Jeff on drums, and we just kind of showed it to you and rolled forward with whatever came out. So
It was sort of a car crash in musical taste as well.
yeah, it was a fun crash though. It was no injuries.